It was a bad time to welcome a stranger into their home. They'd just come back from a long journey. They were tired. Their cupboards were almost bare. And on top of that, a close friend of theirs had died suddenly, and they hadn't really recovered from the funeral. They had not much to give, emotionally or practically. It was a bad time to invite a stranger into their home. There was a national security emergency. The government was warning about terrorists on the streets. One of the key suspects had been arrested. But it had backfired. People had taken to the streets. The city was divided. But then a temple had been desecrated. A grave had been robbed. The political, religious and social unrest was palpable. It was a bad time to invite a stranger into their home. They were scared. They were associated with the suspect who had been executed. They'd heard him talking about a revolution. They'd seen him treat the poor with compassion. He seemed to offer an answer to all of their problems. But then he was executed. Their hopes for their future were in tatters. Everything they had believed had been turned upside down. Despite everything, they invited this stranger into their home. They listened to his stories and they offered to share a simple meal with him. But when he broke the bread, that's when everything changed. They recognized him. It was Jesus, back from the dead. And when they recognized it was Jesus, everything changed. They realized that Jesus opening his arms on the cross was not an act of defeat, but an act of welcome. They understood that the tearing of the temple curtain was not an act of sacrilege, but an act of welcome. They realized that the stone being rolled away from the entrance to the tomb was not an act of vandalism, but an act of welcome. And as they remembered that their hearts were warmed as they spoke to this stranger, they realized this was more than an act of welcome. It was a moment of encounter with God himself. At the climax of the Easter story, just sentences after discovering that Jesus had died and risen from the dead, conquering death itself, the message is simple. It is as we welcome the stranger that we too have the opportunity to encounter God, to encounter Jesus for ourselves. Thank you for being part of a movement of hospitality this Easter. May you too be surprised to find Jesus in your acts of welcome.